Hello, today I'm going to be talking about the books I read in the month of April, but I'm going to introduce something new on my channel, and that is going to be called the Personal Resonance Meter. And this is an idea I've had brewing for some time. It's not the same thing as a star rating. It's basically going to be me at the end of my reviews talking about how much I felt the book personally resonated with me. This has nothing to do with how good the book is, how well written it is. It merely has to do with my emotional connection to the book, and also how much I think it has potential to resonate with me over time. I think that's going to also play a role in the personal resonance score, if you will. Let me know in the comment section below what you think of this as we go on in the video. Next thing to mention is the theme of hope, because as you will see in the title of this video, that is a theme I paid attention to this last month. And it's largely inspired by the first book I'm going to be talking about, movie and book that is, and that is The Shawshank Redemption by Stephen King. Now, the original title of the movie, or the book, I should say, was Rita Hayworth and The Shawshank Redemption. My mother told me that they were originally going to go with that title for the movie, but then women showed up, actresses showed up, trying to get the role of Rita Hayworth, not realizing that Rita Hayworth is not an actual character in the movie. So they shortened it to The Shawshank Redemption. Now, I'm the last person on earth, I think, who has seen this movie, and I got around to it because I was visiting my family in March. All of them are huge fans of this movie. My parents practically have the script memorized, and so I watched it with them, and I was completely riveted by this movie, and I was especially taken by the theme of hope. I'm going to get into that a little bit more in a bit, but this particular theme, as it presented itself in the movie, had my mind turning so much that I knew I had to pick up the book. So in the month of April, I did pick up the audiobook, Rita Hayworth and The Shawshank Redemption. And I'll tell you now, it's a good book, but the movie is far better. The movie is a masterpiece, and I'll explain why here in a minute. So what are we dealing with here? We are dealing with an innocent man who is convicted of a crime of killing, murdering his wife, and the golf pro she is having an affair with. He ends up locked up in the Shawshank prison, enduring the horrific, inhumane treatment that is part of the just system. So it's about being an unbreakable person, being an unbreakable spirit, and having that emotional resilience in a broken, unjust, hypocritical system. That is, I think, largely what we're exploring in the story. And hope plays a role in the story because hope is how Andy finds his fortitude in this situation. And this is largely framed through a character's perspective in first-person narration in the book, and somewhat in first-person narration in the movie, which is the character of Red. So in the book, because Red is telling the story in first-person narration, it's largely limited to what he's able to see, hear, and conjecture, whereas the movie is able to pan out and give us this idea like it's actually happening, and we're not necessarily needing Red in the frame in order to see that happening. I noticed about 11-ish things that were different between the book and the movie, and I could say in every single instance I preferred the movie with what it did. Particularly my favorite part of the movie, or one of my favorite parts, which had to do with a certain duet from Mozart's Le Nozze di Figaro. This actually inspired my Instagram story for my last Why Read announcement, in which I used the Lakme duet. Now, the Lakme duet is a different opera and a different duet, but it was going for a similar vibe. It was a little bit of a nod, at least in my mind. I'll say one of the biggest differences, spoiler free, is that Red in the book is Irish American, so he literally has red hair, whereas in the movie he's played by Morgan Freeman. Morgan Freeman, his acting, and also the scriptwriter of that movie and the director, they brought so much more to that character, in my opinion. I felt like Red was a much more active character in the movie than in the book. In the book, he plays more of a passive role, simply telling the story of Andy. And Andy does inspire him, so there is a relationship there, clearly, but it goes so much deeper in the movie. Now, when it comes to hope, both movie and book are a bit didactic. The movie poster even says, "Fear can hold you prisoner, hope can set you free." So we could see that there's clearly a message of hope can triumph over fear, and that certainly is there in both the book and the movie. However, I feel like the movie takes that theme so much deeper through the character of Red, because Red offers a counterpoint to that. There are parts in the movie, without going into the weeds of spoilers, when Red presents a perspective of hopelessness that makes sense, that's about accepting reality as it is and not believing in things that aren't possible. Now, this is where hope gets a little bit sticky, because there is hope when you see there is possibility according to your will, according to your resources and your ability to work through things. And then there is hope that is false hope, in the sense that if I cut off my arm and expect it to grow back because I have hope it's going to grow back, that's a bit of a delusion. That's a delusional thought. It doesn't make sense in the light of evidence. And so I feel like Red brings that perspective, because he is showing us how this institution, which is it's so backwards, it's so inhumane, how it's causing people to do the same thing day in and day out with this pretense of making people better people when they go back out into society, when in fact they are struggling because they adopt what he describes as an institutionalized mind. It makes it so it's hard to adapt to the world when you've been in this prison for so long, for so many years. And I think it's such an interesting and realistic perspective to have. And there's more in the movie that I could bring up from this perspective, but I feel like it makes sense when he sees and observes what his inmates go through, that he would have this particular viewpoint about hopelessness. From Andy's perspective, however, he sees hope as protecting this part of his mind that no one can get to, that no system can intervene on. And I think he is also right. It also has weight. And the way he's able to use certain things in the movie, I feel like I'm going to just give away too many spoilers, but there's so much to be said about the role of literature, education, and even classical music in order to showcase how opening the mind to possibility is an important thing and how that can build emotional resilience. It's so interesting to consider this, because in the years that I've had Why Read, I can't recall a time when somebody has answered the why read question with hope, that they read because it offers this feeling of hope about possibility that fiction can provide in our mind, opening doors to ideas, ways of being in the world that we haven't imagined before. I hope I'm not planting too many seeds or suggesting that anybody give that answer on Why Read should they ever come on. But I just think it's an interesting perspective to note what we consume and how that feeds our perspective of hope versus hopelessness, if we have that amount of agency to begin with. So I think that the movie just got my mind thinking about this so much. I do implore you, if you are not a movie watcher, at least read the book. But if you do watch movies, and even if you're like me and hardly ever watch movies, I do think this one is worth your time. Now, as for my personal resonance meter, I did talk about this topic a bit on Why Read, if you watched that episode with Man Carrying Thing and Sir Jordan Drew. But things that personally resonate for me, they don't have to be situations that I myself encounter, as I may never encounter what it's like to be a male serving a lifelong prison sentence for a crime I did not commit, or even one that I did commit. But nonetheless, the theme of the movie has stuck with me for weeks and weeks. So for that reason, the movie has the highest level on my personal resonance meter, and the book probably medium. It was very good. I just don't think it stuck with me the same way. It didn't have the same impact on me as the movie did. And again, the movie wouldn't be what it is without the book. So there you have it. Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke was written in 1952 and revised in 1953. This is a somewhat unique first contact story, and before I give you reasons why it was unique, it starts out with the race to space between the US and USSR, but before man can lift off, the aliens come first and halt that expedition. And what's interesting about the aliens in this case, when compared to War of the Worlds, which preceded this book by H.G. Wells, the aliens are not violent in this case. They are able to communicate with mankind. They are able to use our language. They remain very private and mysterious, but they also assume a parental role. They right away bring a halt not only to the expedition of space, but they bring a halt to famine, war, racism, and they make sure there is prosperity for all, there is equal access to education. And you think, wow, this sounds great, right? A utopia. And of course, it sounds too good to be true because it is, but we're not going to go into why. I will say that I thought it was so strategically handled, the utopia part of this, because this book is perfectly structured over 3 periods. And one of the things that came to my mind when it came to this utopia is boredom. And the aliens account for that. In fact, there's this great quote here. Utopia was here at last. Its novelty had not yet been assailed by the supreme enemy of all utopias, boredom. I talked about this book with my friend Whitney from Secret Sauce of Storycraft, fabulous science fiction channel, and she brought up such a great point, which is that Arthur C. Clarke seems to have no hope in humanity being able to get it together and find peace and prosperity without the intervention of aliens. That we're so hopeless as a species, going back to the hope theme here, that we need aliens to intervene for us and assume this parental role. I mean, do any of us have hope for world peace at this point? I'm just curious. Like, it's such an interesting point and such an interesting exploration in science fiction. But there is so much more to the story than that. And I will say that the end completely blew my mind. I had no idea where the end was going, and it totally stuck the landing. Now, this is not my first Arthur C. Clarke book. I have read 2001: A Space Odyssey before. It's been many years. But I remember having somewhat of a similar experience with that book in that the writing style is a bit dry. The characters are flat, and yet the ending makes it all pay off somehow. I will say that. I mean, I feel like the writing is serviceable. It's somewhat journalistic, heavy with the info dumps about what's happening to humanity in these different periods. And there were a couple of moments that I thought could have been a bit more emotionally suspenseful or poignant had the writing elicited that response, but it just didn't for me. And yet I couldn't stop thinking about this book for a few days because I thought it was just so well crafted, and the ending was unbelievable. It was amazing. Just took such a turn, and I will leave it there. But as for personal resonance, I will say medium high. Like I said, the writing wasn't the most evocative and emotional for me, but it did stay with me, and I'm really glad I read it, and I will be thinking about this book, I think, for some time. The Aleph and Other Stories is by Argentinian author Jorge Luis Borges. This was my introduction to Borges, and it did not disappoint. The stories in this collection are very short. Some are only a paragraph long, to a couple of paragraphs long, to several pages long. So we have a variety of lengths here. And like all short story collections, I think some hit more than others for me. There were a couple that I feel like I need to reread, and I will say that I would probably reread every story in this collection. I thought there was so much to gain from it. Every story left me with a moment of pause, a moment to take in the whole of it. I'll go ahead and read out loud a list of some of the stories that stuck with me the most. One of those is the first story, which is The Immortal. The Immortal is about a man seeking a fabled city of immortality. There's The Dead Man, which is about an ambitious, arrogant bandit. There is The Story of the Warrior and the Captive Maiden, which is about 2 women from opposite walks of life who sort of trade places. There's a suspenseful story called Amazones, which is about the risks a young woman endures to avenge her father. There's a story called Deutsches Requiem, which, by the way, shares a title with the Brahms work, which I love. And this is about the perspective of a Nazi, which is intense. It reminded me a little bit of Crime and Punishment, especially with some of the allusions. And Borges' work has several connections to other works of literature, like there are several references throughout the stories, historical, philosophical, musical. Oh, and I would say the Aleph itself, that short story, was an unusual story about the infinite captured in a single point. This leads me to talk about the labyrinth, which is a motif in the story that recurs in almost every single story, either as a story setting or a figurative description. And the labyrinth seems to symbolize the infinite, as well as a repeated pattern of going into one room that leads into another room and another room, but it keeps going and going. We also have mirrors that are sometimes presented, and if we have 2 mirrors facing each other, that creates an infinite pattern. And at the same time, as we have this repetition, we also have this idea presented of no 2 things being exactly the same. Tiger stripes are also mentioned at times, and I think that also leads us to a pattern with some variation. I'm not exactly sure what the tiger stripes represent, but I know they are there quite a few times in the stories, and all this combined seems to reflect identity, connection of self. There is also an exploration or intersection between memory and history and truth, but overall I would describe these stories as enchanting and enigmatic. One of the strengths I found in Borges' writing is the way that he was able to give you what felt like a fully realized story world within a paragraph. You would start a story and you felt like you were walking into something that was already created before you. And the way he was able to do that was quite masterful, in my opinion. There was also quite a range too, from fantastical to historical fiction, speculative, and even metafictional, as Borges sometimes is the narrator in some of the stories, or a version of himself is, or a character in the story is called Borges. And there are also sometimes framing devices to the stories, like somebody giving a historical account, and that becomes the story. Now, this was not a collection I could binge read. I had to take my time. I read maybe 1 to 2 stories, sometimes 3 stories a day. So I took my time through this collection, but I thoroughly enjoyed my time with it. I would certainly reread this collection. My personal resonance rating for this collection is medium high. There were a couple of stories that were difficult to digest, I won't lie, and yet at the same time, I feel like there is so much reread value in this collection, and I was just left with wonder. They have such a great combination of gritty, realistic elements as well as fantastical ones. The Pastures of Heaven by John Steinbeck is early Steinbeck. This was published in 1932. It is a short story cycle, so it's a collection of short stories that has a unifying feature of the same setting, the same time, around the early 1900s, and the presence of a family, the Monroe family, which shows up in every single story. Now, the interesting thing about this collection when it comes to this theme of hope and hopelessness is that with the title, The Pastures of Heaven, La Pasturas del Cielo, you would get the idea that this might be this cozy farm, slow life read. It is not quite that, but I think it's funny because at the end of the first story, you're given that false hope. It says here, and this is, by the way, following Spanish colonizers landing there, displacing the natives, and the land being forgotten for some time until some farmers move in. It says, the families at last lived prosperously and at peace. Their land was rich and easy to work. The fruits of the gardens were the finest produced in Central California. To say that the families lived prosperously and at peace is an outright lie. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that, but if you go on in this collection, it is quite dark. And there are many trigger warnings, by the way, that of abuse, neglect, so many different afflictions. I don't think the stories maintain a super dark level of tone, though, because there is humor. There are some beautiful descriptions of setting, but it did get darker and darker as it went along. I don't think I need to say that Steinbeck has excellent prose. Most of you know that. He has a gift for characterization, details of setting, and dialogue. And I read this, by the way, because it was the Fireside Book Club pick. This is one that Josh nominated and won the vote of, and I enjoyed talking about this book over on Josh's channel with Evie and Carlos, so you could check that out. I will link it below. As for personal resonance, I would rate this medium low. I liked it. I enjoyed my time throughout this collection. I don't have a single negative thing to say, but it just didn't quite blow me away. It wasn't like East of Eden, which was amazing. I love East of Eden. It didn't quite leave that deep a mark on me, but I'm glad I read it and I enjoyed discussing it. So I'll leave it at that. In the month of April, I finished my Lions of Al-Rassan reread. This is largely inspired by medieval Spain, and it is epic, sweeping. Possibly Kay's best character work is in this book, or that I've read so far. I know that's a broad statement, but I love the characters in this book. I think I described them in my spoiler-free review like real living legends. We have what could be considered a ragtag group of friends or a found family, but it didn't feel like a trope. It felt real to me. I felt like I was in the lives of real live living legends, and this was their natural interaction with one another. And in fact, I have a spoiler-free review of this book. I did it a couple years ago, But I think everything I said in that spoiler-free review remains the same today. And I read this or reread this because I was in a fabulous discussion over on Philip Chase's channel with Evan and Aaron. And of course, because of this group, we did go into the history. Evan provided wonderful slides. And so I do highly recommend checking that discussion out. I will link that below as well as my spoiler-free review. And as far as personal resonance, off the chart, super, super high. One of my favorite books of all time. I know I sang the praises of A Song for a Bond when I reread that recently and said that that was my favorite fantasy standalone. But now I don't know. I don't know if it's my favorite. I might prefer Lions. I can't decide. Last one to mention, which I'm almost finished with as the month is about to end, is Klara and the Sun by Ishiguro, which is another reread for me. And I have a spoiler-free review of that book as well. And I have to say that this reread was interesting, especially since I'm thinking about the theme of hope. The theme of hope is there in Klara and the Sun. If you want to read about an AI character having hope, very interesting how that works in the story. And I will be talking about that more in depth with Bridger from the Library Ladder over on his Substack live stream, his first ever, and Jimmy from Chatting with Nuts. So I hope you'll join us if you're part of the Library Ladder Substack. And I am so excited to talk about this book. I love it so much. Personal resonance off the chart for me again with this one. That is it for the books I read in the month of April, some of which had to do with the theme of hope, which is a theme I am continuously curious about. As for May, I am planning to read Fool's Fate by Robin Hobb. That's book 3 in the Tawny Man trilogy. And I found out Bookborn has caught up to where I am. So we're planning to read that book alongside each other. And so I'm very excited to hear her thoughts. She'll probably dust me because she reads so much faster than I do. And I am planning to vlog my experience reading the book. And one other thing I'll say is that the Earth of the New Sun discussion has somewhat changed, and now that's going to be on Jake's channel, Jake from Nerd Level Rising. So I'll keep you informed when that comes up. And I also want to shout out Jake because I attended his dissertation defense presentation the other day on Zoom, and he killed it. He killed it. He did such an amazing job. So I'm so proud of him. Congratulate Dr. Jake. And that's about it. Please let me know in the comment section below. Do you need hope in storytelling? I'll leave you with that question. Thank you so much for being here and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.